I climbed Mount St. Helens in 2018, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I expected it to be easy, but because I had no idea what it was actually going to ask of me. That experience is what empowered me to make that life change that has led to nothing but amazing things for me. Today I'm telling you exactly what went wrong, what went right, and why I'm going back next June to do it all over again, the right way this time. So at this point, we're coming up on about 8 years since I climbed Mount St. Helens. And so the story of how I got there is a little foggy, but I do recall having friends having climbed Mount St. Helens, and I had some curiosity around it and never thought much about it until I really started getting into hiking. And I had a goal set to climb the South Sister for my 40th birthday. That ended up not happening, but instead I ended up climbing Mount St. Helens. And I was supposed to originally go in April of 2018, and the person I was climbing with broke their leg, so we had to cancel our trip. And then a friend of mine happened to have some extra permits for October of the same year, and she offered me one of those permits, and so I got to join her on the adventure. I had previously trained and had expectations of going in April, so I was planning to be glissading down the mountain in the snow. I bought my ice axe. Glissading, for those who don't know, is essentially sliding down the mountain on the snow, and you have an ice axe that you use as your brake. There are certain pathways down the mountain that you are supposed to follow. It's quite dangerous, and there is some planning and preparation in order to do this act, because obviously a myriad of things could happen that could be quite dangerous. I was training and preparing for the mountain, and then when my partner was injured and we had to cancel, I kind of let the whole idea of climbing Mount St. Helens subside. The plan originally being in April meant that training started, I believe, earlier that year. So I had several months of planning and preparation. But of course it was still like winter and spring months in Oregon, which makes it kind of difficult to do as much preparation as you'd like. And then because my partner at that time broke their leg, there was no hiking happening for a while other than me doing some solo hikes on occasion. But with solo hiking, I didn't do a lot of extensive training hikes. The preparation and planning for this hike was not great, even though I was an avid hiker and had hiked many of the hikes in the area that somewhat prepared me for this, but the training just wasn't as extensive as it should be. The difference between climbing a mountain and going on a hike is that you have a lot of different terrain that tends to be on the more extreme side of whatever it is that you may have done on a traditional like day hike. While climbing Mount St. Helens is a day hike, essentially, you're inclining over 5,000 feet in a matter of a handful of miles, and most day hikes that you're out doing in the gorge or Mount Hood or in the Coast Range are 3,000 feet over the course of several miles. So you can get the elevation training, but the changes in terrain on a mountain are very different. You start in a forest setting, and then you come out into a clearing, and then you're hiking through boulder fields, and then you are finishing this hike / climb on scree, which is something I've never experienced before. So that is a place where when we talk about planning and preparing better for the next climb, there will be training that will be more designed specifically for the different types of terrain that I experienced on the mountain. I had had some experience with bouldering, and I would say it was more like scrambling style when I was hiking in the past. Scrambling is where you're walking over a lot of unsteady lava fields, lava rocks that where sometimes you have to get very low and spread your body out in order to safely move across these boulders. The boulders are very rough. They're not smooth cut. They're not granite. They're often in this part of the country lava. Lava is very porous and bumpy and can scratch your hands, cut your hands pretty easily. So while I had had some experience with scrambling, I had never actually done any bouldering. And when it comes to bouldering, you are having to climb on massive rocks that are much larger, that can sometimes be as tall as you or taller, and you're having to use your arm strength more so than your leg strength like you do in a lot of other hiking. When I'm talking about how I prepared for this, I also did not prepare by working with my arm strength, and then additionally, I wasn't prepared for the weather conditions and how my hands would feel. And in October, we had high winds with gusts over 40, sustained winds in the 30s, and that meant that we were starting to have ice build up on our hair and on our eyebrows, eyelashes, and everything. Obviously, because of how cold it was, my hands were frozen, and you have to wear pretty bulky gloves to keep your hands warm on a mountain, so trying to climb boulders with bulky gloves on was a whole nother challenge in itself. Scree is essentially like sand. And so if you think about like a sand dune when you're trying to climb up it and you take 1 or 2 steps forward and you slide back, the scree, the last like large portion of the mountain is all scree. So that's what you're doing, is you're climbing a couple steps forward and sliding back. And it's very long and treacherous and exhausting because it feels like you're never going to make it to the top. Now, this changes seasonally, whether or not you're going to be hiking on snow or hiking on the scree. If I was going in April, I would have had a much different experience and would have probably been wearing crampons or something to help me remain stable on the snow. But in this case, it was more desert feeling, and we were sometimes hands and knees climbing up sand, essentially. It's ash, it's crumbled rock, it's very loose and falling behind you as you're moving. So definitely an experience that I had never had on a regular hike through any of the hundreds and hundreds of hikes I've done in the Pacific Northwest. So when it comes to breathing on the mountain, you start off in the forest, as I said, which is a lot of clean oxygen. It's easy breathing unless you have allergies, which I do also have. And so I was experiencing a little bit of the pollen allergy reactions. It cleared up a little bit when I came out of the mountains, but then once I started in the boulder field, I really started noticing a change in my ability to breathe. It was at this time that I actually met some other climbers who were taking breaks as often as I was needing to because of breathing issues. And I also have exercise-induced asthma, so I was prescribed an inhaler specifically for this climb. And then while I didn't have to take it, there were many moments where I felt like I did. While there is elevation change on Mount St. Helens, I didn't notice the lack of oxygen so much. I think I was so exhausted that was one of the details that I didn't really pay attention to. My breathing felt hindered more so just from exhaustion. Maybe the change in like once I was on the scree, it was a little bit dustier and things like that. The wind was also very strong, so that blowing in your face constantly is also an inhibitor for breathing. There are a lot of elements and things that were all happening at once, and breathing was challenging, period, whether it was from exercise, asthma, allergies, dust, sand, ice, whatever. It was all impacting you at once. On the drive to the mountain, I said to myself that if I can make it to the top of this mountain with my partner specifically, then we can get through anything. This relationship could be saved, because at this point we were almost 20 years in and things were not looking super great. And as I climbed the mountain, I isolated more and more. I started with the group, and then I slowly started pulling away, not only because I was slower than a lot of the people that had been climbing with us. I started pulling away because I was wanting to be more alone and within my own head while I was having the experience. And I remember specifically hitting the scree and seeing the top of the mountain. There is no top to the mountain. The mountain exploded. So the top of the 2/3 of the mountain I remember hitting the scree and thinking I was not gonna make it. And as I was climbing, my tune in my head started changing and shifting from, if I make it to the top, our relationship will be saved and we can do anything. And instead thinking, if I make it to the top, I can do anything. And when I made it to the top, I knew that it was time for me to leave and that relationship was over. And while it took many years for that to finally fully dispel, that experience is what empowered me to make that life change that has led to nothing but amazing things for me. You would think that when you hike up somewhere or climb a mountain or a trail anywhere, that coming back down is the easy part, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Coming back down is painful, it's exhausting, it's exhilarating because you know like you're gonna see your car at some point, but coming back down the scree was easier. Think about running, falling down a sand dune. Well, we didn't fall, we had to maintain course because on either side of you are glaciers and dangerous places. There's no playing on the mountain. So coming back down the scree was kind of a relief. It was a little bit of a break. You also want to make sure you don't get ahead of yourself. Coming down the boulder field was much more challenging and scary. I'm not like extremely fearful of heights, but I'm scared enough that if I'm on some boulders that are, several feet dropping and it's an unstable ground below you and just more boulders that you need to land on, and you're looking straight down this mountain, it brings up a lot of anxiety and fear. Not to mention the fact that your body is already so exhausted and your knees and toes start becoming more and more hammered as you're on your way down. If you've ever done any hike with any sort of elevation, you know that your toes start hammering into the front of your shoes and your knees start aching as they're trying to hold your body up on a descent. And this was the most extreme version of that I've ever experienced. So this time around, if we want to talk about how this is going to be different, I am making a plan a year in advance. And with that, I will still be going through all the seasons. So of course, there are going to be times where I can't hike as much as I want to. The Pacific Northwest, we have rain 9 months out of the year. And while I do hike in the rain, I do prefer to be in fair weather hiking. And so I don't get out and train as much when the weather's poor. I am planning my regular hikes that will be like 2 hikes every month, and those hikes will be progressively more and more challenging in the elevation and in the distance. And then as I get later on in the training hikes, I will be adding on some of the more challenging aspects of climbing Mount St. Helens, which are specifically for me, the bouldering and the scree. So I will be incorporating hikes that actually match as much as possible those types of environmental elements that I felt were very challenging last time, and I want to be able to conquer with a little more confidence this time around. And then on top of the 2 progressive hikes that I'll be doing every month, I'll also be incorporating at least 2 hikes a month that are building stamina and maybe are considered rest hikes, but will also be just making sure that my body is getting into a place where it can handle this hike better this time around. I think that while I'm hiking Mount St. Helens next year, I will be reflecting a lot on the last climb that I did. The last decade of my life has been a blur, and while many of us have experienced a lot of change in our last 10 years, not to mention COVID and all the other things that have happened worldwide, my life has completely turned in a way that I don't even know if I can fully grasp until I get back to that place that gave me the power to make this change to end up where I am now. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm also having some bittersweet feelings about what it might open up for me, and if that will create some challenges, just having to do some emotional processing as I'm doing something that is so physically challenging and mentally challenging. So we'll see how it goes. At the time that I will be hiking Mount St. Helens this time, I will be 48. And when I hiked it last time, I was 40. So there will be a big shift in my body and my mental health and my emotional health and well-being from last time. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the differences in doing this same climb almost 9 years later.
It's a little bit cold up here and windy.
The mountain didn't care that I was cold or tired or not the fastest person in my group. It also didn't care that I was wrestling with a personal hardship. It just asked me to keep moving, and I did, in more ways than one. Nature has always been the place I return to when life feels too much to bear on my own. When I need to ground myself in my inner wisdom, I go to the forest, the beach, or the mountains, again and again. I will return to the wisdom of nature, even if it takes effort on my part to push through the discomfort, to push through vulnerability to reach the wisdom nature offers us all.